been blessed with a beautiful day to come out. Every time we get an opportunity to come out and worship, it's a beautiful day, regardless of what the weather is doing. If we listen to the news media or get on social media or just have a conversation with somebody in general that disagrees with us, and usually most of our disagreements go straight down party lines, you can tell how everyone's going to feel about a topic just by knowing what their political affiliation is anymore. But if we're disagreeing with somebody, one of the verses that they will throw at you is this one from Matthew chapter 1, or Matthew chapter 7 and verse 1, about judging. And they're going to immediately say, you can't judge me. Matthew chapter 1, or Matthew chapter 7 and verse 1 says, do not judge. We can't even judge according to some. And as I was working on this lesson, I was thinking about this issue that we have in our society right now. You can't judge whether someone is a male or female. They have to tell you what they are, what they're pretending to be today. I was thinking about this maybe a year or so back. There was a swimmer in the NCAA. He went by the name of Lila, and I believe he swam for the University of Pennsylvania women's swim team. Now, we couldn't judge him. He felt like he was a female, and that's, even though he had all male parts, that's what he was. Now, the media doesn't tell us this, and if we spoke out about this being wrong, and I always question, why do we never have women trying to compete with men? You never hear of that, but you hear a lot of men wanting to compete against the women. It couldn't possibly be because of the records that they can get going against the females. But we can't speak out against him. But this man that was swimming with the women, it didn't stop in the swimming pool. He also had a locker in the locker room next in between two women. Now, let's not get graphic, but I'm sure we've all been in a swimming pool, and we know that you don't wear the same clothes that you come in off the street into the pool, nor do you get out and wear the same outfit as you leave. No one cared about the girls' rights that he was lockering next to. We can't judge him. That's what we're being told. What about his rights? We've got to be concerned about his rights. What about the other girls' rights? But when you start speaking out and when you start disagreeing with someone about just about anything, well, you become an anti this or that, you're a bigot, you're sexist, you're anti-trans, among a number of less than pleasant names that you get called. And if we speak out against anything that's written about in the scriptures, the world will immediately turn to Matthew chapter 7, and they will quote this passage to you. You can't judge me. Jesus said, look, I don't know how well that shows up on that screen because the projector's kind of dim, but it's in red. Jesus said it. You can't judge me. Is that what Jesus is saying? We justify this lifestyle that we want to have, whatever it may be, in whatever sin we're trying to live by, under the guise of you don't have a right to judge me because you have to be perfect to pass judgment on me. So today I would like us to look at this question. And I should have put a question in my title there. Can we judge? Let's see what the Bible says about it. Are all judgments forbidden by Jesus because of this passage? Let's read Matthew chapter 7. Why do I keep saying Matthew chapter 1? Matthew chapter 7 and verse 1. Judge not that you be not judged. For with what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? For how can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck from your eye, and look, a plank is in your own eye? Hypocrite, first remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you in pieces. Like so many scriptures, when we take one or two verses or one or two phrases and try to twist them to our benefit, we're taking them out of context. Using Matthew chapter 7 and this part of the Sermon on the Mount to forbid any kind of judgment whatsoever is not using the scriptures properly. Judge not, that you be not judged. Oh, that is something that we hear all the time. It's frequently quoted when someone is trying to point out the sins or faults of another. You can't do that unless you're perfect. You can't say anything about what I'm doing unless you're perfect. That's what the world would tell us. And this leaves an impression that we should never make any moral judgment in what we're seeing in others or ourselves. And more so, we're saying that Jesus is condemning this action. Now let's look at what the scriptures really say about this. Let's study this deeper and use them in context about making judgment. And we're going to bring as many passages about this into our study today so that we are using the scriptures properly and handling God's word properly. So let's ask this question. Is this true? Is this the meaning of what Jesus is saying? Are we never, ever to make moral judgments about right and wrong in others? Can we say, well, that's wrong? Our society would say that we can't call anything wrong. There's no clear right or wrong in anything. It's all based on the situation or the surroundings. Is that if we see wrong in others, can we point that out? I'm trying to help you. As a Christian, if we're trying to live as a Christian life, aren't we called to a higher standard of living? And if we see that in one another, is that not what Hebrews chapter 10 talks about? When we come together, we're to work to stir one another up to love and good works. If I see you living in a way that's not right, should I not try to help you improve your life so that you're closer to that calling that we're trying to live up to, and vice versa? Jesus' statement is often misused to try to uphold someone in their wrongdoing. Jesus taught this. You can't judge me. Well, through this study, we're going to see that there are times that we must make judgments. That we don't have an option in the matter. And there are times when it is appropriate to point out and to judge other faults. Now, when we are doing this, there's an appropriate way to do that as well. Yes, we can judge in ways that are not scriptural. We can be too judgmental in how we go about it. There are things that we have to do it correctly. But just because it says do not judge, that's not a blanket statement over everything. We have to look at the whole thing in context, because if that's the case, and we're going to look at this verse later, then before the end of chapter 7 in Matthew, Jesus would have already contradicted himself in that. So we can't carry that verse 1 and 2 out to the logical conclusion, because if it's a blanket statement that we can never judge anything, then before Jesus finishes this one lesson, he's already contradicted himself. So his words are often used to forbid just all manner of judgment, things that we don't like, adverse or unfavorable criticism. In our world today, that ISM, those words that end in that's what people will accuse you of. We don't want to look at facts. We want to look at feelings. And if we present facts that we don't like, then we're going to label you something very unfavorable that ends with a word that has ISM at the end of it. They're going to call you that. Your racism, fascism, whatever you want to call it. We're going to name call, because that's what we do when we don't have an argument, is we're going to name call because we've heard something that we don't like or we don't want to hear. Is that what is being forbidden here? How about when we exercise church discipline? When we talk about that, when we're working with others, like I was just saying, trying to help us improve and live a better Christian lives. In our world today, we don't want to hear anything unfavorable, or we don't want to hear that we're doing anything wrong. All that we want to hear is how good we are. And when it comes to church discipline, any kind of discipline that is administered requires some form of judging on our part. We have to look and examine the moral or spiritual condition of a person. Is that not correct? When we come together as a congregation, when we had elders and the elders had to look at that of how people were living, most of which was brought on by lack of attendance, because that's one of the symptoms of a larger problem. But did we not have to make a judgment call on that? This person's not attending, they're refusing to change, they're not wanting to make their condition right. We have to make a judgment. Exercising discipline requires that. And since judgment is involved, many will say that, well, verse 1 and 2 of Matthew 7 rules out any sort of church discipline, because we can't do that. You can't say anything to anyone until you yourself are perfect. Well, what about exposing those who teach error? Matthew chapter 7, verse 15 and 16. I alluded to that. We're going to read that in a minute. But does that not require judgment on our part? How do we know if it's teaching in error unless we're judging it? Jesus would already have contradicted himself. It requires making a judgment in order to consider false teaching. Well, what do we use for that judgment? Well, we should be going to the Word of God to see if it aligns with that. So, yes, we have to look at our fellow Christians' lives and examine them. We have to look at teaching and examine it and see how it aligns with the Scriptures. But right here, if we don't do those two things, we've already contradicted Matthew chapter 7 and verse 1. So what does this mean? Must we remain silent? When people are overtaken in a fault, are we allowed to talk to them about that? They're involved in a sin that's bringing reproach upon themselves and up on the church. Can we bring that up? Can we discuss that with them? Or a Christian who is blatantly teaching religious error? Well, that's what he said, so we're just going to go along with that. Is that what we should do? If someone comes into this congregation and begins trying to change and teach things that's not in accordance to the Scriptures, are we to remain silent on that because we cannot judge what that person is teaching? Or is it more like this, that Jesus did not rule out all forms of judgment? Because there are times when we have to. Notice even in the immediate context here, it reveals that there are proper cases for judgment to be made. Matthew chapter 7 and verse 6, do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you into pieces. We've already made two judgments, three if you count the difference between dogs and swine, but we've had to determine what's holy, and we've also had to determine what are the dogs and what are the swine, the hogs. While being told we can't make judgments at all. Well, in verse 6, he's already told us to make those. How would we know what is holy? How would we know what the dogs are? How do we know what pearls we shouldn't be throwing down in front of the hogs? Are those not all judgments that need to be made? If we had an animal that walked in here, how would we tell what it was unless we made a judgment call? We have two in our house. One is solid black, one is black and white. One is a dog and one is a cat. They are different. We see them and we're whether we realize it or not, we are making judgment calls to determine what those are in our mind. Now, most of us have reached the age to where we don't have to think much about that. But if we have a parent, if we're a parent of a very young child, we may teach them those things so they can identify the difference between a dog or a cat, or an apple or an orange, or any number of things. How do we tell an apple's round? So is an orange. Are they the same? Well, the world, in their logic, it would be saying, yes, it's the same. It's piece of fruit. It doesn't matter what it is. Well, it does matter. How do we know? Matthew chapter 7 and beginning in verse 15, this implies here that we must make judgment in determining who is a false teacher. You're going to know them by their fruits. Beginning in verse 15, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Therefore, by their fruits you will know them. We can tell the difference between the good and the bad tree, the good and the bad fruit, to the point of being able to cut that bad tree down and destroy it. How can we do that if we can't judge at all? We have species of plants in this part of Ohio that have become invasive, and you cannot sell, if you went to, and you're not even supposed to replant it, a honeysuckle, because it overtakes and chokes out all the vegetation that is supposed to be here. That has been determined to be a very bad fruit or a bad tree. How do we make that judgment call? Well, we look at the type of leaf and the branches, and we can identify it. My yard is full of it. Someone may have thought it was just something that was good to plant, and I might have uprooted some of it and moved it to where I wanted some vegetation to grow. Shouldn't have done that because it's overtaken everything. We make those judgment calls, don't we, all the time physically. Well, spiritually, Jesus is saying you're going to be able to tell these teachers by the fruit that they're creating. You can tell the difference between the good and the bad. So let's consider some remote context when we have to make judgments. We have heard that statement, and it's one that maybe even I've said over my younger years. Someone will say, well, you can prove anything by the Bible. If you take a passage and you twist it and you bend it or pull it out of context, and then make it fit what you want. Well, I guess if you're doing all that, then maybe you can prove something by the Bible, but you cannot prove everything realistically from the Bible. If we don't know how to handle the scriptures properly, then we're going to misuse passages and prove things by the Bible, but that's not making legitimate proof by the scriptures when we're not making proper application. We're told in John chapter 7 by Jesus here, he taught people to use righteous judgments. And in James chapter 2, that old saying that never judge a book by its cover. We're going to read about that kind of judgments that are wrong. Righteous judgments in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 24, Jesus says, do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgments. No, we look at the external. We look at the outside. We look at only what we can see. So if we've been taught about Matthew chapter 7 and verse 1, do not judge. Well, here Jesus is saying you judge with righteous judgment. That already rules out not judging at all. Righteous judgment would still be judging, isn't it? Instead of telling us not to judge at all, doesn't it make sense that Jesus is telling us to base our judgments on what is righteous? Not on physical, but the spiritual measure. Those fruits that we see. We can tell that they're false teachers because of what they're producing. In James chapter 2, and in verse 2, we focus a lot, don't we, on the physical, what we can see in front of us. Judgment should not be made on outward appearances. Beginning in verse 2, for if there should come into your assembly a man with gold rings and fine apparel, and there should also come in a poor man in filthy clothes, and you pay attention to the one wearing the fine clothes and say to him, you sit here in a good place, and say to the poor man, you stand there, or sit here at my footstool. Have you not shown partiality among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Listen, my beloved brethren, has God not chosen the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom which he promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor man. Do not the rich oppress you and drag you into the courts? Do they not blaspheme that noble name by which you are called? If you really fulfill the royal law according to the scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you do well. But if you show partiality, you commit sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. If we're going to be honest with ourselves, we're probably going to make judgment calls based on what a person looks like. If that door opens up, as it's been doing all morning because of the wind, if that door were to open up and someone walked in and they were dressed nicely and they looked like what we would define as dressed for church, we probably wouldn't be concerned too much about them, would we? Come in and have a seat wherever you want. You're welcome here. If someone comes in here and they look like they have slept outside last night, and their clothes are dirty and ratty, and they maybe haven't been too close to a bar of soap in a few days, we would probably be concerned about them. We might even be worried that they were here to cause us harm. Now, I'm not saying we don't take any precautions about that, but isn't James telling us here that we're judging them on the wrong thing? We're treating this one person better because they look appealing to us. And that's how we would be, isn't it? I don't think it would be just us. I think it's human nature. When this was written, the same thing. This person's dressed nicely. They must be better. Well, what if that person is in the best that they have that comes in? That's all they have to wear. Or what if that person was in a bad situation and they are searching to improve their life? They're searching for a way out, and they realize that they need something, and they're coming to Christ for salvation. If we're judging them by the way that they look only, aren't we saying to them, you're not worthy of the gift that has been offered you by God? You stand over there in the corner. That's a wrong way of judging, isn't it? Now, should we dress nice? We're coming to worship God. Should we look like we've just rolled out from under a car working on it? No, not if we can do better. But what if that's all we have? Are we going to judge based on that? But we are, as Christians, we are responsible with judging those who are within. Those Christians who are a member of the congregation, because what they do is going to affect us. 1 Corinthians chapter 5 talks a lot about this, and plenty would prefer that this passage didn't exist at all. Even if it does exist, many prefer not to follow it, because we're having to deal with some uncomfortable issues here. In Corinth, they had a brother that was living in sin. He was refusing to change. He was living happily that way. Wasn't trying to hide it, wasn't trying to change it, and they were accepting of it. And beginning in verse 9, Paul says, I wrote to you in my epistle not to keep company with sexually immoral people. Yet I certainly did not mean with the sexually immoral people of this world, or with the covetous or extortioners or idolaters, since then you would need to go out of the world. But now I have written to you not to keep company with anyone named a brother who is sexually immoral, or covetous, or an idolater, or a reviler, or a drunkard, or an extortioner, not even to eat with such a person. For what have I to do with judging those who are outside? Do you not judge those who are inside? But those who are outside, God judges. Therefore, put away from yourself this evil person. We could not fulfill these commands without judging the way that the world tells us that we're not allowed to. We can't do that. And here we're told several different ways that we're to judge. This man was involved in a very public sin. He had his father's wife. Now, some say that's his mother, but that is not what that's saying. But he was with the woman that he had no right to be with. The church was to address that problem. That he said, the next time you come together, you take care of this. And if he refused to correct his life, he was going to have to face consequences of that. That was part of the discipline. Pleasant? No, not pleasant at all, but necessary. And in this case, we read in 2 Corinthians that this man made corrections in his life. And Paul was telling them at that point, you need to forgive him because he's going to become overwhelmed in sorrow. So it worked. Their judgment, their discipline worked. We're taught by John to test the spirits. Test spirits. Again, this requires us making judgments. In 1 John chapter 3 and beginning in verse 24, how do we know if teaching is of the world or of God unless we can make judgments about it? How do you know what I'm saying is the truth? Well, I'm putting up the passages that go along to support what I'm saying, so hopefully that's one way to show it, but hopefully you're testing what I'm saying. Don't take it because it's what I say, because guess what? I'm human, and occasionally, I don't like to admit this to Jenny, but occasionally I'm wrong. I may not have all of the information. I may have forgotten something. Like anything else that most humans that are honest with themselves would do, we mess up. We may be tired. We may not have heard everything. We make a decision based on something or repeat something that we did not hear right the first time. Well, John's telling us here to test what we hear. Beginning in verse 24 of 1 John chapter 3. Now he who keeps his commandments abides in him, and he in him. And by this we know that he abides in us, by the Spirit whom he has given us. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is of God, and every spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not of God. And this is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard was coming, and is now ready in the world. You are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. They are of the world. Therefore, they speak as of the world, and the world hears them. We are of God. He who knows God hears us. He who is not of God does not hear us. By this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. Test these spirits. All the distinctions that we have to make there, test them. We have the proof. We have the standard in front of us. We have that yardstick that we need to test them, to know whether or not what they're saying is truth, and that's the scriptures. Compare what is being said or taught to the scriptures. And how does what I'm saying today compare? How does this teaching compare? When we look back at a passage like 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and what it's telling us, There's many that would say, well, church discipline doesn't work, or we don't have to do it, or that's going to offend them and they'll never come back. Well, that's not what the scriptures teach, is it? It doesn't say that we have to like it. It says we have to do it. And when that person has been disciplined by the church, what does he say there towards the end? Don't even eat with him. Now, as I was studying the lessons that we had on the Lord's Supper, the word that was translated to eat, I found that kind of interesting because there were 3 different Greek words that were all translated to eat. That and breaking bread, that if we study those 2 phrases, we're going to answer a lot of the questions that we have about the Lord's Supper. But that to eat, that was translated there in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, comes from the Greek word that was a social meal that we were having with him. Well, how do we know all this? And how do we know that we can't be eating with this person unless we make judgment calls? We can't. We have to be able to judge. Jesus is not, in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 1, forbidding a blanket moratorium on no judging whatsoever until you are perfect. Now, this evening, the Lord willing, we're going to look at the kind of judging that he is condemning, and that as Christians we are not to be doing. We already looked at James chapter 2 about judging based on appearance, but we're going to look at more in depth about what we cannot judge, and then look at some more righteous judgments as well, the Lord being willing. If you're subject to the Lord's invitation in any way, we take this time as we end our lesson to think about the condition of our soul. If there are things that we need to change in our life, let's do that now while we have the opportunity. Consider our soul's eternal home, because if we have not made plans and are not prepared, then when we die and leave this earth, we will no longer have the opportunity to make corrections. So let's do that now while we have the opportunity as we stand and sing.